Hello, everybody. Ben Tint here, coming at you with another great interview on the Lone Guitarist podcast. This week I met with David Leisner, who is a man of many talents. He's an incredible composer, guitar player, and teacher. We only met briefly because we both had things going on that night, but I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. There's a lot of great stuff. Stick around to the end of the video where I will give you lots of information about his upcoming shows as well as where you could buy his publications. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. I moved my camera yet again. You know, I feel like it's an ever-evolving thing to try to find the best spot in your basement. I got this lamp at Target for $12, so we're going to see how that works out. My guest this evening is a person that I've heard a lot of things about, but haven't had a chance to formally meet until about 5 minutes ago. He does all sorts of stuff, composes music, has great insights about teaching, as well as plays a variety of music very well with very solid interpretations. David Leisner, thank you so much for coming on the podcast tonight.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Ben.
So we were just talking before I hit the record button that you kind of do a little bit of everything, and I know most of the things that I hear about you come from the teaching and the publications. Because correct me if I'm wrong, in addition to your book, you've also had kind of an extensive career of publishing articles of teaching. Is that correct?
Well, not exactly. I mean, I published a few articles.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I mean, teaching is one part of what I do. I mean, I consider myself split down the middle as guitarist and composer, and in the guitarist part, there's a good amount of teaching as well as performing and recording, of course.
Yeah, but the way that you teach is incredible because I talked to Rupert Boyd a long time ago on this podcast, and one of the things that he had mentioned, in addition to him saying that, because we're going to talk about the techniques and some of that stuff that you talk about, especially with the right hand. But he mentioned, in addition to that, you have this very holistic view of music and interpretation and how you try to get your students to express themselves uniquely instead of sounding like everybody else. Would you mind talking about that for a moment?
Well, sure. I mean, I think it's a tremendous bore if all my students sounded exactly alike. So, and in fact, if all students in general sounded exactly alike, and in fact, we're all different people, right? We all are very different people. We have different makeups, different psychological makeups, different physical makeups, all kinds of things. So music is simply an expression of our life, and we want to express our life, which is different from the next person's life. So even if one is teaching just technique, for example, the technique is an expression of your life as well, and the technique is the sound that you make, for example, is an expression of who you are. So if you sound exactly like the person sitting next to you, there's something wrong. I do believe that all my students, or at least most of them, have certain things in common, and things that I hope I would be proud of. And then at the same time, I work very hard to develop their individuality as well. So that's very important to me.
That must have taken a while to recognize in yourself as a player and a teacher, because you know um, it's important to teach. Let's just say strokes with the fingers. It's important to teach that in a certain sequential way, as to avoid tension, as to produce the sound that you want to produce, as to have a sustainable technique throughout however long your career might be.
Hmm.
And also teach with a little bit of, or impart on the student a bit of freedom to say, yes, this is how you do it, but I can't tell you what to sound like, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, um, definitely. I mean, there's a delicate balance one strikes between, well, say, just interpreting a piece of music. The most important thing first is that you see what's on the page, what's there, what information has the composer given you, and you put that information together with your interpretation of that and the transference of that music to you, your body, your being. And then what does it become when that music goes through you? So there's a balance. Um, Music in terms of music interpretation or performing or playing music, um, it's not, as some I think regard it, a creative act. It's a recreative act. You're recreating what has already been written, but you're channeling it through you. And that's the beauty of interpretation and of the individuality of any given player. You put your own person together with the personality and the person of the composer and see what comes out. And that
Yeah.
balance is the beauty of music making, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. You put that, that when you said that, I immediately thought of a master class I saw, probably one of the last master classes I saw before the whole world shut down. It was Oscar Delia teaching the it was the Mertz, it was the elegy, and he said, no, you don't. I forget what it was, but it was a specific thing. He said to the student, no, you don't get to make that choice. That choice was already made when he wrote this piece. And so that's Oscar's way of saying what you just said. You were a little more eloquent. He was a little more like Oscar, which is wonderful, right?
Yes, of course.
But he's communicating that exact idea that that decision you don't get to make. You get to make some other decisions, but
That's
that's
right.
not one of them.
That's right. Well, Oscar and I share a lot in common musically, and
Yeah,
that approach certainly is one. I mean, you have to begin with what the composer has given you on the page,
yeah,
and then from there there's a certain amount, maybe a lot of leeway, but how much leeway? Well, that's up to interpretation, of course. But there's a certain point beyond which you go over the borderline, and you're
right,
just
right.
not playing that person's music or what they wrote on that in that particular case.
And since we're on the subject, I mean, I was going to save this for a little bit later, but as a composer, that must be in composition is something I know next to nothing about. I mean, I took a composition class in undergrad, and I don't want to tell you the letter grade I got. But the point is, it was for a requirement. It was, it got me to grad school. It's where I needed to be. Um, as a composer, how do you negotiate guitarisms and the music that you want to express on the guitar?
Well, when I write music, I often don't write at the guitar. I may not write at any instrument at all. I may just write at the desk. Very often, I write at the piano, for which I have almost zero skills. I can barely play the piano, but I use
This is
it.
just for show.
Yeah, that's right. I have one here, but
Yeah.
and I use it all the time for composing. But I use it to hear the sonorities. Um, Stravinsky actually said the same thing. Stravinsky could easily have uh, written any piece he wrote without an instrument there, but the instrument allows you to hear sonorities better, and the piano is better in general than the guitar, even when you're writing for the guitar. If I'm writing a guitar piece, and not all of my music is guitar music, but when I am writing a guitar piece, I may compose it at the piano for the musical ideas or thoughts. And I can imagine how it looks and feels as I'm writing it, how it looks and feels on the guitar. That, of course, comes with a number of years of playing, but I think even somebody who's played only a few years would have that ability to hear and feel that. Um, I really think it's important not to do too much at the instrument, at least for me. I really shouldn't speak for anybody else, but I think that the danger of writing at the guitar is falling into old guitar habits, things you're used to. And if you want to write something new, something different than anybody else has written, you have to work from your imagination first. So, and for me, I'm a musician first and a guitarist second.
Right.
So my instincts always first come from the musical source, and then I see how does that work on the guitar.
And that's interesting because in addition to playing some of the you know, I've never seen you perform live, but I've heard quite a bit of your recordings. In addition to playing a lot of the traditional repertoire, like the Villalobos and the more contemporary stuff.
I really have made a point of playing mostly guitar music, music that was written for the guitar.
Oh, okay.
At the same time, I have played, of course, arrangements of Bach, usually my own, and arrangements of other music. Um, but no, I try to stay clear of that. But in the very recent years, I have had a kind of a love affair with Schubert, who wrote very little for the guitar, and I feel very strongly that Schubert can work beautifully on the guitar. Of course, Schubert, as I'm sure you know, played the guitar, and in fact, we think he wrote many of his early songs at the guitar. So guitar came very naturally to him, and the sound of the guitar was in his ear. So two big pieces, for instance, that I arranged not too long ago were the Arpeggione Sonata,
Right.
originally for this instrument called the Arpeggione, which is sort of a cross between a guitar and a cello, and the
Hmm.
piano. I arranged the piano part for the guitar, not the arpeggione part. My chamber partner in this case was Zuill Bailey, the cellist, and he had always wanted to play that piece with the guitar, and I had often thought of it as a fine guitar piece, or could be. So I set to arranging it, and it was an enormous amount of work that really paid off nicely and turned into a big chunk of Zuill's in my album that was put out about 8 years ago or so. Very popular album. And since then, I've arranged the entire song cycle Die Schöne Müllerin for guitar and baritone.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm in the midst of editing that recording now. We just recorded it, and I think it'll be a wonderful recording. That's with baritone Michael Kelly, who's a magnificent guitar, baritone rather. And
I listened to one of those the video that you had sent me of that,
oh, okay.
and your guitar sounds incredible.
Okay.
I listened to it just I didn't even plug in my speakers or my headphones. I just played it while I on my iMac at work, and from that I was like, oh my gosh. So I plugged in the headphones and listened to the guitar, but I don't know what microphones you used, but I want them.
uh, I I don't know what did I send you a YouTube clip or
I think it was a YouTube. Yeah.
yeah, well that was recorded by a videographer and I don't know what he
Yeah.
used. That was a
Yeah.
from a live performance, so I
It
can't tell
was
you what mics he used.
wonderful. Before we leave this topic, as a classical guitar player, you're always sort of bombarded with guitar music, string music, or piano music. And your guitar playing and arranging in Arpeggione as well as the song cycle, the Schubert song cycle, I feel like it works really well. And I'm not just complimenting your playing, but it just happens to work really well. And you know, the connection that I'm making is I remember Antigone saying in a masterclass years ago, the guitar can be a miniature piano. It's more than just that, but it can be a miniature piano.
Hmm.
And you were talking about composing music on the piano. Sometimes it makes it to the guitar, sometimes it doesn't. But I'm seeing a real connection from the composer's lens of those two instruments being very much related.
Well, they are and they aren't. It's funny. They are related in that they're both melody and accompaniment instruments at the same time. Um, They're both instruments that are used to accompany other instruments because they supply the harmonies. Um, but that's probably where the similarities stop, because then there are, of course, any number of major differences between the two instruments, starting with the pedal of the piano. And guitars, unfortunately, don't have a pedal unless we're electric guitarists.
Right, right.
So, but the what you're talking about in terms of an arrangement sounding well on the guitar, that really is the product of a lot of work. And that work that I talked about going into the Arpeggione arrangement, and even more work going into the Schöne Mühlerin arrangement, which is a much longer piece, it's 70 minutes of music.
Mm.
Um, the the amount of work was just enormous, and the work involved really is all about um, it's basically all about subtraction. Um, you try to be as true as you can to the original, and you fit in as much of the original as you can, and then you start subtracting. And you keep subtracting this note and that note and this note and that note and this rhythm and that rhythm until you get to the point where it starts to sound like a guitar piece. And then the question is, does it still sound like Schubert? And if not,
Right.
you have to add in a little bit more, and then you have to maybe take out something else. And this little dance between addition and subtraction, but mostly subtraction, is where all of this work really lies. And it's the secret of a really good arranger is how to know what to subtract when, and just how much to subtract. And it's not an easy thing. And anytime I come up with any kind of solution, um, I may sit on it for a week, and the next week I say, "Oh, that's terrible! It sounds awful. It doesn't sound guitaristic at all, or it doesn't sound like Schubert. That's ridiculous. Go back to the drawing board." And
Right, right.
it's an endless process, really.
Yeah, I can't. I don't think I could. I don't think I could take on that kind of responsibility. And I say that in all sincerity. Like that's a heavy, because as guitar players, I mean, even take the first cello suite. The first, I mean, whose edition is that? Lorimer's edition? Is that Provost's edition? Is that Frank Kuntz? Is that there's all, and all of those things mean different things to different people, and
Absolutely.
that's a heavy weight.
Well, in fact,
Um,
when you're talking about the Bach cello arrangements, for instance, I have published the third cello suite. You're usually talking about adding some bass notes, or even an entire bass line, or some other notes, that harmony
right.
notes, and that is a huge responsibility. And you really have to know what you're doing to do it well, and to have it come out sounding like Bach, and yet at the same time sounding like a guitar piece. That's the ideal.
We talked a little bit about some of your philosophies about teaching, but I'd like to ask you a couple specific questions about your most recent publication, and some ideas about teaching. So first of all, before we talk about any right hand or left hand stuff, I just gotta say, there's a huge block quote in here that I put in my notes. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it starts with, performance anxiety can begin so innocently. And then you go down the rabbit hole of exactly what happens when you're on stage. Someone else whispers something to their neighbor. Uh, Worse yet, they're probably discussing how strange or inauthentic you sound. Your teacher's upset. You're missing a lot of notes. And at the end, you say something along the lines of, "Don't worry, it happens to more people than you think. You're not alone." And I remember the first time I read that, I was like, oh. There's been plenty of times where I've forgotten a note, especially in school, and my whole life flashed before my eyes. And what was a millisecond felt like 20 years.
An eternity, yeah.
What's can you talk a little bit about that section about performance anxiety, and talking about the autopilot idea, and just sort of how you were able to put that into words?
Well, this it came from an article that was originally published in American String Teacher magazine, I think. Is that what it's called? The ASTA magazine. I think it's American String Teacher. And then it became the last chapter of my book, which, by the way, is called Playing with Ease. It's published by Oxford University Press. Um, the the article came about because of my own issues with performing anxiety that intersected clearly with just about everybody that I know. Very few people are free of performance anxiety. And, you know, there are zillions of things written on the subject. I mean, from books to articles to all kinds of, you know, blogs and things on the internet. It's a huge subject, and couldn't possibly be covered in the few pages that it takes to cover it in my book. But what my book and that article summarize basically is the thought that much of performance anxiety arises from a lack of focused concentration. And the question is how to focus that concentration. What kinds of things are getting in the way, are obstacles to your concentrating well, and once you recognize what those things are, what some of those things are, how do you get rid of them? So I came up with what I called, for lack of a better term, 6 golden rules. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've read the chapter, but
You should read it. It's a pretty good book.
Thanks. You know, the first, I mean, one of the ideas, I don't necessarily have to go in order, although the order of it in the book is specific and was written in that order for a reason. But one of the things that one has to do simply is basically be here now.
Right.
You don't, if you're on stage, you want to be on stage. You don't want to be in the audience. So that means that you're listening to yourself as you're playing on stage, not as someone in the audience is listening to you. You want to be playing in the giving mode, not in the receiving mode of a listener. You're giving to the listener. And if you're actually in that giving mode, you don't have time to be distracted. You don't have the energy to be distracted because you're too busy giving. So that's one of the things that is in there. Another is the automatic pilot idea, which you mentioned. Your automatic pilot. I mean, the concept of automatic pilot has, you know, several sides to it, but one of the good side is the side that you use whenever you learn anything. For instance, if you're learning a passage in a piece, you repeat it over and over again, and you fix problems as you go along, and eventually you relegate whatever you're doing to your automatic pilot mechanism. Right. And that automatic pilot takes care of it for you next time you play the piece, whether it's in front of an audience or whether it's to yourself in the practice room. So that automatic pilot has a tremendous capacity. It's like, you know, like a computer with a huge amount of gigabytes or whatever, terabytes or whatever the largest unit is these days. It's a very large, you have a very large capacity to retain things without thinking about it. That's your automatic pilot. You don't want to go on automatic pilot when you're performing, in the sense of just sort of playing through the piece without any involvement, any emotional involvement or just excitement or whatever. But you do want to play with your automatic pilot in the sense of allowing it to work for you and not having to worry about it. So if you trust that your automatic pilot will in fact do what it's built to do, you'll play much better.
I can absolutely relate to that. And we were told to just, one phrase I heard all the time in undergrad and grad school was to just go share with them what you've been practicing.
Yeah.
Go out there and just show them what you've been practicing. And that kind of takes the idea of, I'm going to go out there and play the guitar. I'm going to force this into, and not fight the piece, and rather just go do what you would normally do in the practice room. And then as we progressed, we heard, okay, now bring the practice room to the stage. I'm sorry, bring the stage to the practice room, so that you're practicing performing instead of just practicing.
That's right.
Certainly. And then the other point that you made about being in the moment, I'm going to share a story. I think you'll get a chuckle out of this because it's pretty embarrassing. I take a very small amount of beta blockers to stop the hands from shaking. And there's different opinions on that, but it's worked well for me. And one time, and it wasn't a very important performance, but it had been a while since I got up, and it was at school, and there was all the faculty was there, and I took my normal dosage, but I saw that after I took them, that the numbers on the bottle had increased, meaning that my doctor had doubled my prescription. I don't know how this happened. Instead of taking 3 10 milligrams, so 30, which is what I would normally take because I'm kind of a big guy, I took 60. And this was, luckily I take them about 4 hours before performance. And I was practicing my piece, and all of a sudden it felt like I had a very strong drink. And I'm sitting in this practice room thinking, this is odd, what's going on? And I check the bottle, and lo and behold, it says 20 instead of 10. And I tried just about everything. I ate a big meal, I drank a lot of water, I closed my eyes for about 10 minutes. And then as I got on stage, it was wearing off. The point of my story is that I was so laser focused. Maybe it was because I was so relaxed. But I achieved in that performance, that was the first time that I achieved what I consider like a close to perfect focus on the moment. And what I took from that is, okay, I don't need to be as medicated each time, but I can train myself to focus on we talk about just the right amount of tension in the fingers, just enough to get the stroke you want, just enough amount of focus to focus on this note that's coming ahead, nothing else, and nothing before it. Right. And when you're talking about autopilot and training yourself to perform that way, I think that's definitely what it reminds me.
Well, yes, and then the flip side of that is, what I talk about in terms of do not judge yourself while you're performing. What you need to do, what anybody needs to do, is figure out a way, if it's possible, to focus so that you don't need the beta blocker or something to help you. There are some people that their nerves are such that they just need the extra help. Most people are not like that, though. There are usually are solutions to get you there without the help of the drug.
You should see the rest of my medicine cabinet, though. You might change your mind. You might change your mind when you see what else is in it.
One of the things that takes our focus away from what we're doing, especially when we're on stage, is that we're so busy thinking about what are the other people thinking about what I'm playing, and how are they judging me? And as soon as you go into that, you're dead in the water, basically. You're done. Right. You're cooked. It's done. You can't think that and be in yourself and be in the music. It's impossible. So you need to banish those thoughts. And if there's certain people in particular in the audience that make you nervous, before you go on stage, think about those people and just think of their head and put a big X through their head. Right. Yeah. Just block them out, and just don't pay attention to them, because the important thing is to pay attention to what you're doing, as you were describing, paying attention to the note that you're playing and maybe the note you're about to play, and nothing else.
Right.
And as soon as you go into the verbal mode, into any kind of words, that's also another thing that leaves you incapacitated. When you play music, you have to be in the non-verbal mode. So as soon as you say to yourself while you're playing, you say, oh, that was great, or oh, I can't believe I made that mistake. Those are words.
Right.
Don't go into the word territory. Stay in that nonverbal zone, because that's what music is. It's
And,
nonverbal.
and another thing that does, you're absolutely right, is if you're focused on the big picture of a piece, in theory, a buzzed note or an arpeggio that didn't come out the way that you want is not the focus of what's happening. The focus is the big picture, and you're looking at a small, it's like seeing a beautiful car with a dent in, like
Exactly.
the beautiful car is still going to be beautiful. You want to fix the dent ideally, but that might not happen tonight.
Those things hardly matter in the larger picture of a performance. And I'll tell you something else. Those who concentrate mostly on not making a mistake, they tend to be very boring. If you are so concerned about not making a mistake, you are playing in fear. And that's not very interesting. You need to go for it. You need to go for whatever your goal is for that piece or that moment. Just go for it. And if you make a mistake along the way, fine, but let it go. You got to
Yeah.
just let it go, especially on stage. Again, you can't stop and think about that mistake I just made because, again, you're dead in the water. Don't think about the mistake you just made. Just let it go. It's water under the bridge. It happened. It's done. We're on to the next thing.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Wow. This idea, is this on? No. My electric keyboard is squeaking and making some, I know some composers that would love that. Maybe you can write a piece about it. I shut the electric keyboard off and it's still making sounds. There you go. So to just change gears a little bit, your your book, Playing with Ease, talks in detail a lot about the anatomy of the hands. It talks about other things as well. We were just talking about performance anxiety, and you talk about, how you can mitigate that and work on that over time. But one of the things that always strikes me when I flip through your book is that you mention a lot the anatomy of the finger, the anatomy of the hand. You say things like tip joint and middle joint, and I don't know if you say base joint or bottom joint or
Top joint.
something like
I
top
call
joint.
them the tip, the middle, and the top.
Now, I'm not going to ask you to validate using that language because we know that that's a great way to look at the hand. But what I want to ask you is, you know, it's not until pretty recently, I mean, the guitar is still a very young instrument, but it's not until I would say maybe I think Shearer talks about it, right? So maybe 50 years or so ago that we start seeing literature and pedagogy talk about the anatomy of the finger. Before that, I mean, if you look at like the Sor and the Carcassi and all that fun stuff where they're using tables to prop up the guitar and this and that, there's not real attention to that. So I guess the question that I want to ask you is, how did you, in your personal journey, find I'm going to talk about this kind of stuff, and this is the discovery that I'm going to put into words.
Well, this has been a lifelong pursuit of mine. In the very early part of my career, I was more interested in the physics of making a sound, but that quite quickly turned to the anatomy involved in music making and understanding what the body does when we play an instrument. And by the way, the anatomy of the finger and the hand is, in many regards, the least important thing involved in playing, and that's part of the revolutionary aspects of the book. The book talks about the whole body
Mm,
involved in playing the guitar or playing any instrument, and understanding how the anatomy works and how the whole anatomy contributes to what we do with our hands and our arms. So that really is very important. The first two chapters are about the whole body. The third and fourth chapter are about the individual hands. The fifth chapter is about using the large muscles, which is the most revolutionary part of the book. But the idea of understanding the anatomy is very, very important, because you can't do what you do with the guitar or any instrument really unless you understand how it is you're doing what you're doing with your body, and how does that body work. So just for example, you were talking about fingers, just understanding excuse me, how joints work, the joints of the fingers, for example, but also the joint, the wrist joint and the elbow joint and the shoulder joint, and the fact that the arm does not begin at the shoulder joint, but it begins at the sternoclavicular joint, where the sternum meets the clavicle, or the breastbone meets the collarbone. Those kinds of understanding are extremely important, because they give you the bigger picture that is, if not required, ultimately really essential to making the best sound with the least amount of effort. So, I mean, I can go on, but it's funny. I mean, the book is not a very long book in a way, but it's a very dense book, and it
Right.
requires a lot of very
Right.
close study, because there's a lot of stuff in each page, almost.
It adds to the forward momentum, which is the guitar canon, right? Because we know, one of our favorite jokes in undergrad was, or maybe this was grad school, was to make fun of the Carcassi illustration about how to play the guitar like this, with like one leg crossed, and to do this, and we would make fun of that, right? And perhaps there were people that played that way. I don't know of anybody. And you mentioned Ida Presti and your book, and you say what she did was great. It worked for her. She was amazing. But you're probably going to hurt yourself if you do that. Here's some other ways to get good sounds. So I
And by
really,
the way, there are many exceptions to that. There are a
of
number of
course,
contemporary players who came out of that school and who do just fine with it. But in terms
right,
of what we know, what I know, and what most people in the medicine business know about the way bodies work,
yeah,
that's a very dangerous thing to do with your body,
right,
uh, because like everything in the body, um, it's a domino effect. So
of
if
course,
you, for instance, turn your wrist this way, well, that's going to turn your shoulder this way, and that's going to make the other shoulder do weird things, and then the whole system is out of alignment. And when things are out of alignment, they don't work as well, and you get injured, and so on
yeah.
and so forth. So.
To anybody who's watching, if you have more questions about that idea of breaking the right hand, my episode with Pat Kearney is he goes into a bit of detail about the history of that, and then sort of the Presti Lagoya disciples that still, I don't know if that's offensive to say disciples, the influenced of that technique, that are still pretty big up in that area of Canada.
Hmm.
Well, that's kind of all that was on my list of questions for you. Do you have anything to leave us with like in regards to how to use music to stay sane during this ever increasingly chaotic, well, a little less chaotic now, but still pretty chaotic time in our lives?
Well, I mean, music is a refuge. Music is the savior of many people. It was the savior for me. I had a difficult family situation growing up, and music was a great savior for me. It was my safe harbor, and I think it is a safe harbor for most people, certainly many people. Um, and I think you can always trust music to be your safe harbor. Um, so again, the word trust is important. You can trust the music, and you can trust yourself in music, to go into it and be a whole person, and being a whole person in the context of working on music takes you away from the concerns that we have in this difficult, challenging time, and it's a great blessing, isn't it, to have music when all this other stuff is going around us, even if it may not necessarily put as much bread on the table as we might like. It does sustain
That's all
us.
it puts on the table is bread.
I'm sorry?
That's all that it puts on the table is bread.
It's bread, yes.
That's pretty much all we can afford.
Yeah, but
Cool.
it does sustain our souls.
Well, thank you so much for spending part of your evening with me. I hope to continue this conversation in person someday, and I wish you the safest and most musically inclined rest of the quarantine.
Thank you so much, and of course, I wish you the same, and hope you stay safe and healthy, and that all your listeners do as well. Thanks for having me on, Ben.
Well, there you have it. It was pretty great, right? Yeah. David Leisner's book, Playing with Ease, can be found on Amazon or at many guitar retailers or on the Oxford University Press website. David Leisner is also playing at the Memphis Guitar Festival. It's all virtual. It is on March 6th at 7:30 p.m. I think there's some other big names on that one too, like Bill Cannengeiser. Thank you so much for watching. If you like it, please like and subscribe. It really helps, and I'll see you next time.